Not all books are bestsellers. Some may be intended for a niche audience or just fly under the radar for whatever reason. Hey book readers, today I'm shining the spotlight on 13 of my favorite books with less than 3,000 ratings on Goodreads. We'll go from books with the most ratings to the least, and if you love a book that hasn't gotten enough attention, be sure to share it in the comments. First up is Undefeated, Jim Thorpe and the Carlisle Indian School football team, and this has 2,855 ratings currently. Written by Steve Schenken, this is the non-fiction story of a powerhouse football team, one of America's greatest athletes of all time, and a legendary football coach. What's surprising about it is how perfectly it balances education and entertainment. As the book jacket says, this takes an unflinching look at the U.S. government's violent persecution of Native Americans and the school that was designed to erase Indian culture. It's the story of a group of young men who came together at that school, the overwhelming obstacles they faced both on and off the field, and their absolute refusal to accept defeat. Since we're over 100 years removed from Jim Thorpe's athletic accomplishments, his feats are oftentimes forgotten. This book shows you just how much he deserves to be in the same breath as his contemporaries like Babe Ruth and two-sport icons like Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders. Perhaps even more so because of the prejudice and societal challenges that Thorpe faced. Next up is 12 Mighty Orphans by Jim Dent, and this has 2,069 ratings on Goodreads. And yes, this is another football book. As a born and bred Texan and diehard sports fan, it's one of my favorite books of all time. This is a nonfiction read about the Mighty Mites high school football team that hailed from Fort Worth, Texas in the 1930s and 40s. It's the ultimate sports underdog story featuring an undersized group of Depression-era orphans who band together to form one of the most formidable football teams in Texas history. You can't help but cheer for all the quirky characters as they come up against football giants that they have no business beating. It's also worth noting that this book was made into a movie starring Luke Wilson and Martin Sheen in 2021. I haven't got around to seeing the movie yet, but I hope to do that soon and just see how true it stays to the book. And on we go to the next book, which is Dark Orbit by Carolyn Ives Gilman, and this currently has 2,226 ratings on Goodreads. The quick synopsis is that a newly discovered planet called Iris is surrounded by dark matter and thought to be uninhabited. Nobody lives there. However, there are beings living there on this crystalline world, a blind, sentient species whose members navigate their world with a bizarre vocabulary and extrasensory perceptions. One of the crew who's exploring this planet, Thora, goes missing, and first contact with this mystifying civilization ensues. It's a sci-fi gem that explores how unsettling, new, unexpected experiences can be, and will also make you think about just how incomprehensible an alien world might be if we actually discover one. Next up is The Time It Never Rained by Elmer Kelton, and this currently has 1,834 ratings on Goodreads. So far this list has lots of sports books and books set in Texas. We're checking one of those boxes again with this one, as it's a classic western set in 1950s West Texas. Taking place during an extremely long drought, this book is almost entirely about the character of Charlie Flagg, a good old boy and Texas rancher who simply won't wave the white flag. We get to see time and time again the strength of his character, his persistence through tough times, and his unwavering self-reliance. What makes this book so good is that Charlie feels like a person who may actually exist, and the conflicts he faces are more personal and on a smaller scale than something like saving the world or defeating the bad guy. It's a character study that transports you to a certain time and place. Up next on the list is The Life and Times of Persimmon Wilson by Nancy Peacock, which is sitting at 1,286 ratings on Goodreads. This is a fairly obscure historical fiction novel, also described as a rip-roaring, old-fashioned adventure romance that needs to be added to everyone's TBR list ASAP. And I'll just let the book jacket do the talking because it's a great synopsis. 1875, Drunken Bride, Texas, an ex-slave named Persimmon Wilson awaits his hanging for the murder of the man who once owned him. As he waits, he pens his story, from the brutality of slavery on a Louisiana sugar plantation to a ranch on the Texas frontier, so much Texas going on here, the Texas frontier to life among the Comanche Indians, All through his travels, Persimmon Wilson seeks the one person he loves, a light-skinned house slave named Chloe. When he finds her, she is passing for white and is the wife of their former master. Now I'm going to talk about Steal Across the Sky by Nancy Kress, which currently has 1,269 ratings on Goodreads. So what happens in this one is that aliens called Atoners show up on Earth's moon and put out an ad recruiting 21 humans to be witnesses. These witnesses are going to check out other civilizations. And the aliens say that they've committed a great wrong against humankind and are doing this recruiting and forcing of witnessing to make up for it. Reading this book, you'll get some great first contact mystery and what if sci-fi scenarios. If you zone in on these positive aspects, you won't mind the flaws of the book too much. And yes, there are flaws, like the mediocre characters and a couple of loose ends that you eventually see. But overall, it's an enjoyable read that you can turn into a page-turner if you give it half a chance. This next one is a book I've talked about before. It is Hunters of the Red Moon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, and it has 1,144 ratings on Goodreads. Now here's pulp fiction at its finest. In this book, a bunch of different aliens and an Earthman are kidnapped from their homeworlds and forced to try and survive for a month as they fight against aliens that no one has ever seen and live to tell the tale about. The good news is that these prisoners who are forced into fighting can choose any weapon in the universe that they'd like to wield against these unseen aliens. The bad news is that the aliens they're fighting against have a special skill. Yes, the characters aren't fully formed, but this Hunger Games type of book is a guilty pleasure read that you can breeze through in just a couple of days. Up next is one of my favorite books that I've read so far in 2023, and that's Singer Distance by Ethan Shantagner. I really need to know how to pronounce his name. And this currently has 1,043 ratings on Goodreads. If you like sci-fi or alt history books or want a captivating novel you won't want to put down, go read Singer Distance. It has parts that feel like Arrival, Interstellar, and Project Hail Mary. Here's the quick and dirty on this lesser-known novel's plot. In an alternative version of our world, Mars and the Earth are in communication via math problems carved on huge scales into the planets. In 1960, after the Earth has failed to solve Mars's latest math problem, and our rusty red neighbor has been quiet for 30 years, some MIT grad students road trip to go paint their solution in the desert. The book then picks up with a couple of these students a few years later as they try to solve the latest seemingly unsolvable problem. Don't worry, you don't have to know a whole lot of math to read Singer Distance. It's not going to overwhelm you with mathematical theories, but it keeps you wanting to know more about the two main characters, Rick and math genius Crystal Singer. And what I love so much about this book is that it'll just have you on the edge of your seat as you try to find out if Earth and Mars will ever communicate again. Next up is The Marrow Tree by Katie Waitman, and this just has 436 ratings on Goodreads. Now here's a sci-fi fantasy with topics you don't see every day in this genre, which may explain why it isn't extremely well known. You see, it examines the role of art and artists, as well as the impacts of censorship. Now, that being said, there are plenty of sci-fi boxes that get checked, and the scope of the book's world is amazing. The book revolves around Mick of Vizania, the galaxy's greatest performance master. Basically, he's the GOAT of artists in multiple mediums, but he faces death for performing a banned song and dance. I know it may sound like a lame galactic Broadway soap opera, but trust me, it's fantastic, especially the way the book delves into Mick's training, his past, and the love that he has for another character as he prepares for the trial of a lifetime. Here's another one that I've talked about before, and that's Hug Chicken Penny by S. Craig Zahler, and it only has 382 ratings on Goodreads. This strange book is a fusion of fantasy, sci-fi, magical realism, and gothic horror. Its story and characters are peculiar. And I mean, even the book cover looks like an intricate wood carving made several centuries ago. Here's the description. Born from tragedy and an unknown paternity, this asymmetrical and white-haired baby inspires both ire and pity at the orphanage, until the day that an elderly eccentric adopts him as a pet. The upbeat boy's spirit is challenged in his new home, and he's exposed to prejudiced members of society in various encounters. Now, will Hug and his astronautical dreams survive our cruel and judgmental world? This book is so great because Hug Chickenpenny is such a great character. He's smart and lovable, and while life may be difficult for him, and he may be treated extremely poorly, he stays positive and full of hope throughout all of his hardships. In a word, he's resilient, and you'll experience joy and sorrow throughout this book, so I hope you're as emotionally resilient as Hug is. And finally, if you haven't got enough reasons yet to read this one, here's another. It's just 264 pages long. You can read it over a long weekend. Now we're getting down to some really obscure books. This next one is The Chaos Function by Jack Skillingstead, and it has only 222 ratings on Goodreads. This is a little-known sci-fi time travel thriller that poses the question, if you could save the life of someone you love, but it might harm lots of other people, would you do it? It's an edge-of-your-seat ride that examines the implications of the butterfly effect, or how one seemingly tiny change can make big waves over time. And second to last on my list is Buying Time by Eric Brown, which only has 191 ratings. This is a solid, if not spectacular, time travel book where the unlikable main character, Ed Ritchie, starts jumping further and further back in his life while still retaining his current consciousness. The book alternates between Ritchie's time-traveling adventures and the story of Ella Croft, a journalist in 2030 who's looking into Ritchie's life and his disappearance. If you can overlook the blatant social commentary in this book, it's a light thinker for those who like time travel stories. And last but not least is The Virgin and the Whale by Carl Nixon. It only has 184 ratings on Goodreads. I'm ending with a charming work of historical fiction that I really enjoyed a few years ago. And I'll just quote what the book jacket synopsis says. It is 1919. Elizabeth Whitman is working as a nurse in the local hospital, waiting for her husband to return from war, though he is missing in action, presumed dead. She keeps him alive for their 4-year-old son, Jack, by telling the story of a man she calls the balloonist, who went away in a hot air balloon and has adventures in exotic countries. When she is asked to nurse a returned soldier whose head injury has reduced him to an animal-like state with no memory, Elizabeth starts telling stories to him. It is through them that she manages to engage his interest and offer him a new life in more ways than one. There you have it, 13 of my favorite books with under 3,000 ratings on Goodreads. Hopefully, this inspires you to show some love to those more obscure reads that sound interesting to you but don't have much acclaim for whatever reason. I encourage you to try and support smaller authors who have less of a following if you can. Let me know in the comments any that you'd like to suggest, and happy reading!